Hi there, it's January the 5th and we're continuing our journey through the good news of Matthew and the Greek scriptures, and today we're looking at Matthew chapter 5 and verses 1 to 26. The teachings of Jesus are organized in Matthew's Gospel into 5 blocks, preceded by stories of Jesus' doings and miracles, and then comes a block of teaching. And so this is the first block of these 5 blocks of teaching. N.T. Wright suggests that Matthew has again in mind his Jewish audience and has in mind the 5 books of the Torah, of the books of Moses, when he's organizing it in this way. Certainly, as Jesus is coming to this particular part, he sits down to teach. It's very significant that he sits down to teach, because that's a rabbi's position in Judaism. A rabbi sits down to teach. And so Jesus is seated when he gives this first part of his teaching. Some of the most key parts, in one sense, it's like his moment of being on the Mount of Sinai. He's giving his instructions to those who want to be his apprentices and his disciples. And the first thing he says is, how happy, how fulfilled are those who live like this, those who live poor in spirit, those who live with a sense of brokenness, those who live with hunger after righteousness and thirsting after righteousness, those who live merciful. N.T. Wright again suggests that this is not a list of characteristics of how to get to heaven, but this is actually a list of those things which will reflect a genuinely fully human society. Mercy, love, purity, pure in heart, all of these things are those things which identify the real humanity that God wants from us. And therefore, as Jesus gives this, he's saying, blessed are you. Now we have the word blessed in many of our translations, happy, contented. The Greek word is makarios, and it really is looking back to a Hebrew word, ashrei, ashrei, which means fulfilled, contented. The first verse of the Psalms, ashrei aish, blessed is the man, happy is the man, fulfilled is the man. And so what Jesus is giving here is pointers to how we can be fulfilled in his kingdom. And when we are living in this way, we need to be open about it, and we need to say this is the way that full humanity should be lived, and not hide it. He says a city set on a hill can't be hidden. You don't light a lamp and then put it under a bed. You don't hide it away, but you let it shine. It says, so you are to shine. You're the salt of the earth, says Jesus. And salt obviously brings both preservative and antiseptic qualities with it. So Jesus is choosing his pictures really carefully as he shares them here. And then Jesus talks about the fact that in his coming, he is not abolishing the Torah. Now, Torah is translated in our understandings often as law, but Torah is actually more like instruction, the nurturing instruction that a mother gives to a child at her knee. And Jesus says, I'm not abolishing that instruction. I'm not abolishing that sense of God shaping us. He says, in fact, I've come to fulfill that. I've come to be the fulfillment of that story. I've come to be the embodiment of God's instruction, of God's teaching, of God's way and God's purpose. And so he says we're not to live as though there was no instruction. We're not to live as though there was no guidelines. He is the one himself who embodies those guidelines. And he begins to give towards the end of our reading, instructions are on hating one another, on speaking ill of one another, and also on the importance of reconciliation. He says the law says, the Torah says this. And so he says that Israel has been living with this external Torah, this external law, which has not kept them from walking in bad ways. But Jesus is talking about something now internal. He's saying this goes deeper. This goes into the very spirit of man. If I speak ill of a brother, or if I refuse to be reconciled with a brother, then actually something inside me is rotten and needs to be dealt with and needs to be sorted out. All of this teaching that Jesus brings is so key for how we live our lives from day to day. This is not just good ideas, this is not just advice that Jesus is bringing. He's laying out here, just like God laid out at Sinai, the way that his people would live. So Jesus is laying out here the way that his apprentices, his disciples, are going to live so that he becomes more and more formed in their lives. As we think upon these things, as we act upon these things, we will become those who, as Jesus said, will be blessed, will be happy, will be contented. Have a very good January the 5th.